I don't think I've played this game since 1998. As soon as we brought these two crazy elements together, film noir and Mexican folklore, it was like one of those things that just sparked idea after idea after idea. And just whenever you hit something like that, it's so rare. You know, like sometimes you're just brainstorming, you're just like pulling teeth to have an idea of like how are we gonna, you know, puzzles or rooms or locations or characters. It's such hard work sometimes to come up with ideas to fill in the framework of this thing you're making. But with Grimm, it was like a fire hose. Like we couldn't turn off. It was just such a explosion of ideas and creativity on that project. It was really fun.
Let's talk about adventure games. Adventure games are, true to their name, games where you control a character who embarks on a grand adventure, and rely much more on narrative and storytelling than in-depth gameplay. The genre spans all the way back to the 1970s with early text adventure games, also known as interactive fiction. However, advances in technology soon allowed for computers to display graphics alongside text, and thus was born the graphic adventure game. Now that designers could implement sprites and backgrounds into their game, they decided to replace the text parser system carried over from text adventures, leading to the widespread adoption of the point-and-click control system. This is when adventure games hit the height of their popularity, with developers like Sierra Online, who developed series such as King's Quest, Gabriel Knight, and Leisure Suit Larry. And one of the premier developers of adventure games during this golden age was LucasArts. LucasArts is, or rather was, the game development division of Lucasfilms, the production company founded by Star Wars creator George Lucas. Their adventure games focus more on slapstick comedy and witty dialogue than a complex dramatic narrative. They quickly established themselves as adventure game giants, with their game Maniac Mansion being a huge commercial and critical success. The game's engine, script creation utility for Maniac Mansion, or SCUM, was used for 11 other LucasArts adventure games released in the late 80s and 90s. It was at LucasArts where game designer Tim Schafer got his start, being part of the team behind the acclaimed Secret of Monkey Island and its sequel. He eventually became the director on the games Day of the Tentacle and Full Throttle, and the subject of today's video, Grim Fandango. This was the last game Schafer developed at LucasArts before leaving the company to form his studio Double Fine Productions, where he led development on games such as Psychonauts, Brutal Legend, and Broken Age. Grim Fandango is certainly an odd little game, even considering LucasArts' other works. Released in 1998, this was LucasArts' first 3D adventure game, and the first to run on their new game engine, Grime, or Grim Engine, which is a modified version of the Sith engine used in Star Wars Jedi Knight. Grim Fandango is a film noir-inspired adventure game themed after the Day of the Dead, which is certainly a unique mashup. While the game initially came out for Windows PCs, Double Fine released a remastered version in 2015 for Mac, Linux, the PlayStation 4, and the Vita, with Android, iOS, and Nintendo Switch versions coming out later. This version is built off of the same code as the original, or at least as much of the original code as Double Fine could find in the LucasArts archives. But the company also reached out to fans who had developed patches that fixed bugs in the original version, and even incorporated fan-made code that added point-and-click controls, which were not present in the original release for reasons I'll explain later. The remastered version features updated textures for characters and items, as well as an entirely new lighting engine. You can switch between the remastered and original renders with the press of a button, which really emphasizes the new lighting and character textures. There's even the option to play in widescreen, but I don't recommend this because it stretches the pre-rendered backgrounds in full-motion videos, which just looks awful. Grim Fandango was unfortunately released at a time when adventure games were falling out of style, thanks to technically impressive 3D games dominating the video game market and shifting the attention away from adventure games, which most people considered stale by that time. The game received widespread critical acclaim and is often regarded as one of the greatest games ever made. But commercially, it didn't do so well, which contributed to LucasArts' decision to stop producing adventure games. Sales-wise, it wasn't necessarily a bomb, as it did eventually become profitable within a few years, but for LucasArts, it was just too little too late. That said, the game has quite the cult following and is a fan favorite when it comes to both LucasArts and Tim Schafer's video games. Now, over 20 years after its initial release, I want to explore Grim Fandango and see if it still holds up today, and why it led to the death of LucasArts adventure games. The game takes place in the afterlife, specifically in a realm called the Eighth Underworld, also known as the Land of the Dead. This is where a person's soul is taken to after they die, when they are then forced to travel the Land of the Dead until they reach the Ninth Underworld, or the Land of Eternal Rest. But getting to the Ninth Underworld is not easy by any means, as a soul must travel for 4 years across a series of life-threatening, perilous locations in order to reach it. However, depending on how good the person was in life and how much money they were buried with, they may be able to pass through the Land of the Dead much quicker. That's where the Department of Death comes in. The DoD is a business that hires reapers, who are responsible for harvesting the souls of the recently deceased and sending them on their way to their final resting place. The reapers also act as sales agents, who try to persuade the soul into buying a travel package based on how they acted when they were alive. People can buy a much safer and faster method of travel depending on how they acted in life, including the number 9, a train reserved for the most pure and honest souls. You play as Manny Calavera, who was forced to work as a Reaper because of the sins he committed when he was alive. We don't know what Manny did in life to deserve his predicament, and neither does he. And spoiler alert, we never find out what it is, though we can assume that it was something horrible to force him into what is essentially community service. That's not really important, however. All we know is that Manny is a travel agent for the Department of Death, albeit not a very good one. When the game begins, Manny is currently in the middle of a streak of terrible clients, and therefore isn't able to work off his debts and leave the afterlife.
Where do they get these guys? They don't qualify for anything good, so I can't sell anything good. Can't work off my time, and I'm stuck. Stuck selling walking sticks to a bunch of burros for eternity.
Manny decides to steal a lead from his rival Domino, a Reaper who's getting premium sales left and right. After bringing on the elemental spirit Glottis as his driver and tampering with the DoD's message system, Manny learns about Mercedes Colomar, or Meche, a new arrival in the underworld who was a saint throughout her entire life. Manny grabs Meche in order to bring his luck back up, but to his surprise, the records claim she isn't qualified for any travel packages. In despair, Meche sets off on her 4-year journey, and Manny, feeling responsible, leaves the DoD to find Meche and guide her to the Ninth Underworld. The premise behind Grim Fandango is certainly unique, borrowing ideas from Aztec mythology with a story partially inspired by Glengarry Glen Ross. And you do need to buy into the idea of the afterlife containing travel agencies and salespeople in order to get into it, which might be difficult for some people. But it helps that the actual storyline is much more straightforward, though we'll talk more about that later. Grim Fandango is an adventure game following in the footsteps of LucasArts' previous works, except obviously in 3D. You control Manny and move him around each scene, picking up objects, solving puzzles, and talking to the colorful cast of characters. Previous adventure games used a point-and-click interface, which is a simple way of getting your characters across the screen and highlighting interesting objects. Grim Fandango exchanges this for something else entirely: tank controls. Tank controls are a bit of a divisive topic, but they were fairly common in the early days of 3D games. If you're unfamiliar with them, they're a method of controlling characters in a 3D space that's more restrictive than the now universal free roam style. In that control setup, your character moves in whatever direction you input on the controller, so if you hold left, your character moves in that direction. By contrast, tank controls only let your character move forward and backward, and pushing left or right rotates them. If you want your character to move left, you need to hold left to turn them around, then hold forward to get them moving again. While this control scheme has appeared in multiple games across various genres, it's usually associated with games like Tomb Raider and Resident Evil. And Grim Fandango was not the first adventure game to use them either, as Alone in the Dark and Bioforge also played this way. Just like in those games, Grim Fandango uses tank controls to maintain character movement through each location. One problem with free roam movement is that your directions are relative to the camera's position, meaning that if you move in one direction and then rotate the camera, your character will move at a different angle. However, Grim Fandango's camera is fixed, changing between set positions as Manny moves around the world. That means that you can move forward through various camera angles without changing direction, meaning the player won't run into a wall when the camera shifts position. I'm not gonna blame Grim Fandango for going with tank controls, because for a time they were the standard control scheme for 3D movement. You have to remember that games like Super Mario 64 were the exception, even though its 360-degree movement became the new standard. However, like I mentioned earlier, the remastered version incorporates a point-and-click control scheme, much like the system used in Full Throttle. It works very well for Grim Fandango, and is a great way for people who haven't played the original or who can't stand tank controls to experience the game. I, however, decided to play with the tank controls because I'm used to them and I want it to be authentic. And if the game's achievements are to be believed, it's still Tim Schafer's preferred method of playing the game. And it's because I played the game with tank controls all the way through that I realized just why this control scheme died out. The game does a decent job laying out areas that make sense with the tank controls most of the time, but transitioning between rooms is sometimes a huge pain in the ass. Walking into tight entrances, like doorways and elevators, can be very tricky because they're often too small for Manny to comfortably walk into with these controls. Manny also takes his sweet time turning around, so correcting your angle to enter another scene is often very finicky. This alone makes the point-and-click interface the method I recommend, because even though I will always use the tank controls here, they just haven't held up. Aside from the doorway issue, another problem I have is that many areas are way too large for absolutely no reason. There's a lot of empty space in many of these locations, maybe to accommodate for the controls, but it's not fun to travel through. And the point-and-click controls only make this problem worse, since you're just waiting for Manny to hustle his bones over to where you need to be. Thank God this game has a run button, because otherwise moving around would be way too annoying. The run button also makes Manny turn quicker, which is appreciated, but I still wish Manny could pick up the pace when he's shuffling his feet. Grim Fandango is a mostly linear game, with progression unlocking in a fixed sequence with only a few instances where puzzles can be solved in various orders. And with no fast travel, you're forced to manually walk from one area to the next. I can appreciate that the designers wanted the player to explore their surroundings and not make navigation too easy. I just think that the world could have been shrunken down a little. It isn't just a matter of walking from location to location, however, because this is an adventure game, which means you'll also be collecting items and talking to the people that inhabit the land of the dead. Interacting with other characters is no different than any other adventure game, as you can choose from a series of dialogue options to learn new details or advance the story. But scavenging the world for items is a little more advanced because of the shift to 3D. Grim Fandango removes most of the traditional adventure game UI in order to adapt to the initial lack of mouse controls. Rather than clicking on an item to do something with it, you press a button or key to either examine, pick up, or use an item in the field or in Manny's hands. A problem that many 2D adventure games have is that items you can pick up are sometimes hidden too well in the background, forcing you to pixel hunt for them. In this game, Manny will look at an object or part of the scenery that he can interact with if he's close to it, which prompts you to press the examine key to discover what he's looking at. I love that system as a means of finding interactable objects, even though items are usually right in plain sight. What I don't love is moving around and trying to find the right spot to interact with something that I know is there, another problem that arises from tank controls. But what do you use those items for? Well, that's where the puzzles come in. These are, in essence, the obstacles you need to overcome to make it to the end of the game. You've no doubt heard adventure game puzzles described as illogical and mind-bendingly difficult to figure out, which is a reputation that's somewhat exaggerated, but in a lot of cases is justifiable. However, one thing that set LucasArts apart from other adventure game studios is the lack of unwinnable scenarios. Many adventure game developers, such as Sierra and Revolution Software, included puzzles that would either lead to a death or dead end if you solved it incorrectly, forcing you to restart from a previous save game. This made failing a puzzle with a ridiculous solution all the more infuriating. LucasArts adventure games, however, have no failure scenarios, meaning you can attempt to solve a puzzle as many times as you want without losing any progress. This makes dealing with their puzzles, even the ones that make little sense, much more tolerable. A good portion of Grim Fandango's puzzles are sensible, and most of the solutions aren't immediately obvious, which is great puzzle design. But there are a handful that require thinking way too outside the box to be considered an enjoyable challenge. I won't spoil any solutions, but there's bound to be at least one puzzle that will drive you crazy trying to find the answer. For me, it's that damn lock puzzle. That thing can go to hell. Although, I guess it's already there. Now, every puzzle is tied into the narrative in some way, but some lean heavily on minor plot details or small exchanges between characters to give you the proper context. And I'm not sure whether this is a good or bad thing. On one hand, it forces you to pay attention to the story and not just ignore the characters and areas around you. On the other hand, the details can be so inconsequential that it'd be really tough to expect the player to remember them. And in at least one instance, the clue that provides the context for a puzzle can be completely skipped over. Even considering the time the game was released, I don't know whether or not it's fair to put that kind of responsibility on the player, at least on their first playthrough. You might find yourself resorting to the try everything on everything method, which will eventually get you results, but I know that brute forcing the game like that isn't exactly fun or challenging. I recommend you have a guide on hand if you decide to play this game, but I implore you not to look at it unless you're absolutely stuck. A lot of this game's reward, just like any adventure game, is finding out the solution to a puzzle yourself without any hints. So yeah, I have mixed feelings about the gameplay and puzzle design, which is a sentiment I think most people have about this game. Depending on who you ask, Grim Fandango's gameplay ranges from slightly clunky to downright archaic, and I think I'm somewhere in the middle. It's aged better than other 3D adventure games of its era, but it's definitely rough around a lot of its edges, and I can only use the "this game is 20 years old" excuse so many times. I also encountered a couple of technical issues when playing this game, which certainly didn't help. For transparency, I played the Steam version of the remastered edition for this video on a computer that's built to handle games way above Grim Fandango's minimum recommended specs. For the most part, the game ran just fine, aside from one or two graphical issues, and problems like entering doorways have always existed. But I noticed a lot of animations playing faster than they should be, which I think is a result of the remastered version not adjusting the timing for faster machines. Manny kept teleporting around this garage when the camera angle transitioned, which was not disorienting at all. This area with the flaming beavers wouldn't work unless I kept pausing and unpausing the game because the beavers kept getting stuck. And in one case, Glottis got trapped in an animation loop when I tried to talk to him, forcing me to restart my game. Aside from that, the game is completely playable, and most of the bugs are minor ones. Grim Fandango doesn't autosave, however, so you want to make sure to save frequently just in case something disastrous happens. Now, I've laid out a lot of complaints that you might think would keep me from recommending this game, but I haven't really touched on the excellent parts of the game, the story, characters, and world building. The gameplay issues I mentioned do hold the game back, but I think that Grim Fandango, as an experience, is one of the finest adventure games ever released. For the rest of this video, I want to explore the finer points of Grim Fandango's plot, cast of characters, and setting to discuss what makes the game so memorable. That said, I will be spoiling quite a bit of the game's story, so if you're thinking of playing the game, I recommend you stop the video here and experience it for yourself first. While the gameplay is far from flawless, the writing, narrative, aesthetics, and world are masterfully created and single-handedly make a playthrough worthwhile. With that said, let's first summarize the rest of the plot. At first, it seems like Manny's journey is a quest for self-redemption to rectify his mistake in stealing Meche's commission. But Manny soon learns of corruption in the Department of Death and is recruited into an underground resistance movement, the Lost Souls Alliance. Their leader, Salvador Limones, tells Manny that someone may be stealing number 9 tickets from their rightful owners, and that Manny may not be responsible for Meche's fate. Initially, Manny doesn't care about this conspiracy and just wants to find Meche and bring her safely to the end of the road. Salvador guides Manny out of the city of El Morro, where he reunites with Glottis and heads off into the depths of the afterlife. Traveling through the petrified forest, the port town of Rubacava, the depths of the Sea of Lament, a mining facility at the edge of the world, and finally the gate to the Ninth Underworld. It's quite a long journey, and the game takes place over 4 years as Manny walks through the land of the dead. And along the way, he slowly begins to unravel the corruption that's plaguing the afterlife. Manny discovers that somebody is printing counterfeit number 9 tickets, presumably in an effort to sell them to unfortunate souls to make a profit, and learns that the DoD is in fact a crooked operation led by gangster Hector Lamans, with Domino and Manny's boss, Don Copal, also being in on the scam. They stole tickets from the people who had earned them and sold them off to rich souls who wanted to escape the underworld as fast as possible. Without their tickets, the souls are forced to wander the 8th Underworld, but to ensure they keep quiet, Domino arranges for them to wind up at his mining facility at the edge of the world and forces them into slave labor for eternity. The film noir influence on Grim Fandango is very obvious, with specific influences from Casablanca and The Maltese Falcon. It hits all the expected beats for a film noir story, and some of the characters are call-outs to actors in movies from the genre. The plot itself is enjoyable, even though the mystery is not very subtle, and the villains are kinda cut and dry, but it's the writing and characters that really make the narrative wonderful. The dialogue in this game is really great stuff, shifting between comedic one-liners to dramatic speeches and tense exchanges. Grim Fandango knows exactly when to be serious and when to be funny, and strikes a perfect balance between the two. When it comes to advancing the storyline, the writing plays it sincerely, establishing the usually poor situation for the characters. But then the game will take a break from that and switch into its dry and sometimes pretty dark humor.
Busy as ever, I see.
I'd have more work to do if you had more clients.
Ouch.
A lot of the jokes are fairly understated, relying on wordplay and subtle jabs between characters, which contrasts fantastically with characters like Glottis, who bring in humor that's more loud and abrasive.
It's hard to totally panic when you're wearing that little sailor suit.
No, it's not!
Speaking of characters, they're a huge part of what makes this game feel so alive, even if they're all dead. The souls of the dead are represented by skeletons inspired by Kalaka figures, which are decorations associated with Day of the Dead celebrations. We can assume these people share the same characteristics they had when they were alive, and they all come from a variety of backgrounds and cultures. While the game is inspired primarily by Mexican ideas on death and the afterlife, the cast isn't confined to Hispanic stereotypes or cliches. It's an eclectic mix of personalities that are lifted straight out of noir stories, gangster movies, and just about any other popular trope you can think of. I don't mean that the characters themselves are cliché, although their specific characteristics are very familiar if you're a movie buff, but rather the mix of different character archetypes and cultural representations mixed with the excellent writing really makes this cast stand out. Going back to the balance of humor and drama, I found myself laughing a lot at these characters, and most have at least one genuinely funny line. But there's also a lot of heart and passion behind them that makes you understand what their goals are and what they're doing in the land of the dead. Despite this being the underworld, it's still possible for these souls to quote-unquote die, as it's possible for them to be sprouted or infected with a substance that causes their skeletal body to grow flowers and is apparently an extremely painful way to die. It's never officially been confirmed what exactly happens to a soul that's been sprouted, however. Some speculate that now that soul is trapped in the land of the dead forever and has no way to move on to the next world. But others, including Tim Schafer, believe that they're forced to either move back to another realm of the afterlife or reincarnate entirely, punishing them by making them live through another life before their soul can be put to rest. Whatever the case may be, sprouting allows there to still be stakes involved, even if the characters are all dead, which makes the bad guys that Manny faces throughout the game an actual threat. And if there's one character who really embodies how fantastic this game's cast is, it's Manny himself. On the surface level, Manny is a very entertaining character thanks to his witty dialogue and the voice performance by Tony Plana, who you may recognize from his roles in The Three Amigos and Ugly Betty. Plana does a fantastic job portraying Manny as a snide but also charismatic and charming protagonist, clearly fed up with his time in the afterlife. His voice goes a long way in selling Manny as a protagonist, and to go on a bit of a tangent, the voice acting as a whole is pretty good. There's one or two characters with annoying voices and occasionally a weird line delivery, but overall the actors do a great job portraying their roles. And again, help establish the multicultural world that helps create the backbone and spirit behind the Land of the Dead. Anyway, back to Manny. A classic example of good character design is what's known as the hero's journey, which encompasses not just the physical travels of the main character, but also the transformation they undergo in their personality along the way. Manny is a perfect example of the hero's journey storyline done right, as he goes from a cynical, somewhat selfish character to a genuinely caring person with a sense of justice. Before Manny learns that what happened to Meche wasn't his fault, he takes it upon himself to find her and help her reach the fate he knows she deserves. He sets up a steady job managing a restaurant and casino in the town of Rubacava while he waits for Meche to arrive. And as soon as she does, he sets off after her again, leaving behind his comfortable lifestyle in order to fix what he believes is his own mistake. Though Manny initially wanted to find Meche to try and save his job, he realizes that Hector's plans need to be stopped and makes it his mission to set everybody free. Manny spent so long trying to work off his own debt that he hasn't seen the reality of the afterlife he wants to escape. And when he finally understands the terrible situation the souls of the underworld are faced with, he feels that he needs to help them move on to the next world. There's a point where Manny is standing right on the border between this realm and eternal rest, and he has every right to just walk on out of the 8th Underworld. And he refuses to do so until he's saved every soul that Hector and his gang have trapped. Manny is one of my favorite main characters in video games because not only is he a great protagonist, but he's a genuinely funny, snarky, but upstanding person. Take his relationship with Glottis, for example. Glottis is the comic relief character, usually very silly and loud, who accompanies Manny on his journey. It would be too easy for Manny to always be snarky towards him, always giving him a hard time. But Manny does legitimately care about Glottis, worrying about him when he's in danger and considering him a close friend. And then there's Meche. When we first meet her, we see that she's been a kind, compassionate person all her life. But by the time we meet her again after she spent so long trapped in the land of the dead, she's become bitter and cold just like the rest of the world around her. On that subject, the world that Manny travels in is one of the most fascinating video game settings I've ever experienced. The typical video game settings that you see all the time, like grasslands, deserts, and snow levels, are all areas that we see in the real world. And as such, we can easily attach ourselves to them because they're familiar to us. But the land of the dead is such a foreign concept because, well, none of us are dead. It's a world that, if you believe in this sort of thing, we will all visit eventually, no matter what we've done in life. Which explains why there's such a large mix of cultures and personalities on display. You would imagine that these souls would want to depart from the 8th Underworld as quickly as possible, and Manny believes this at first too. But many of them either can't or don't want to move on to the next world. Some are stuck in the afterlife because of the counterfeit ticket scheme, but others are just sick and tired of searching for the exit. Many souls have simply given up trying to reach the gateway to eternal rest and are content living the rest of eternity in the land of the dead. And I think that's really interesting considering the game's themes of morality and your soul being judged for your actions. The better you were as a person in life, the faster your trip will be to the 9th Underworld. But the more time you spend wandering the afterlife looking for the way out, the more you suspect that the way out doesn't exist.
And Brio, why do you stay in town? Why don't you head off toward the 9th Underworld?
Manny, you can only search for something for so many years before you stop believing in it altogether.
Visually, Grim Fandango is also eclectic, with scenery ranging from Art Deco architecture, shadowy noir cityscapes, to even Dadaist art collages. As for the graphics themselves, I think they still hold up fairly well, even the original renders. I do like the remastered graphics more, obviously, with the better texture quality and especially the dynamic lighting. I even think the pre-rendered backgrounds still look pretty decent, even if they weren't changed with the remastered version. They still have a kind of charm to them though, because while it does feel like artwork for a game from the 90s, it's aged remarkably well compared to some other early 3D graphics. And again, they add a lot to the world of Grim Fandango, with its range of visual styles and mixture of familiar elements and otherworldly wonder. But if there's anything that really contributes to the world and atmosphere, it's the music by Peter McConnell. McConnell created a lot of soundtracks for LucasArts, as well as several other Tim Schafer games and the majority of the Sly Cooper series. If you played a Star Wars game released during the 90s and early 2000s, chances are Peter McConnell scored it. His work for Grim Fandango is amazing stuff, and it plays a huge part in making this game's aesthetic so wonderful. The compositions themselves incorporate a wide selection of instruments, and each track feels distinct from one another. And in the remastered version, the soundtrack is fully orchestrated, with live performances by the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. Stylistically, the music covers a huge spectrum of genres, including jazz, big band, traditional Spanish folk music, surf rock, and bebop, helping every song develop an identity of its own, both in terms of the track's arrangement and its sound. Each area has its own designated theme, and there's a lot of musical variety between areas that are connected to each other. You can be in one room with a Mexican guitar-led track and walk to another room that has a brass-heavy jazz piece. But it's not just the styles of music that make the soundtrack so great, it's the layers of atmosphere and emotional weight the soundtrack adds to the game. Rather than just being background music for all the locations, the songs provide a tonal foundation that help guide the mood and feel of each area. When the game needs to be dramatic, the score is dramatic alongside it, and when it wants to be lighthearted, the music becomes lighter. This soundtrack is so good it was released on vinyl, which is great for all you collectors out there. So to wrap this video up, Grim Fandango is fantastic aesthetically and narratively, but less so as a video game. Its story, characters, and world are phenomenal, with brilliant character development and interactions alongside a very creative setting. But it is held back by its antiquated design and control scheme. It's a game that I think everybody should play at least once, if for anything just to experience the story, and to see what adventure games are like if you aren't familiar with them. I heavily recommend the remastered version, not only because of the graphical upgrade and release on modern systems, but also because the point-and-click controls are much better. If you can, pick up either the PC, Mac, or Linux version, as the point-and-click controls are obviously more natural with a mouse. From what I understand, playing the game with a controller isn't bad, but using a computer is just the better option. While I can't exactly say it's one of the best games ever developed, Grim Fandango was an absolutely amazing and unique experience, and is definitely a fantastic adventure game that rises above the rest. Grim Fandango's controls and gameplay are admittedly stuck in the past, struggling to keep a stagnant genre alive. But the narrative it wanted to tell and the world it created are timeless and are just strange enough to stand out without feeling too abstract. Thematically, it's still as fresh as ever, and while the game is showing its age heavily in some areas, the characters and story will always be enjoyable. It's not just a game about death, it's a game about overcoming the perils of our own humanity, about facing our past and coming to terms with it. And in that way, games like this have universal appeal. Grim Fandango may be a reminder that we're all going to die eventually, but it also tells us to be the best person that we can be while we're still alive. And that's a message we could all learn from.